Celeste arrived at Ashford Corp at 5:30 a.m., 40 minutes before her shift started, because that was the kind of woman 3 years of surviving had made her. She had pressed her uniform the night before. She had memorized the building map. She did not allow herself the luxury of being unprepared. The housekeeping supervisor, a brisk woman named Patrice who spoke in half sentences and never made full eye contact, handed her a cart and a floor assignment without looking up from her clipboard. 34th floor. Executive wing. Hallways, conference rooms, the lobby area outside the CEO's office. You don't touch his desk. You don't touch his shelves. You finish before 7 or you're invisible when he arrives. Understood? Celeste said yes and meant it. She rode the elevator alone. The floors climbed in silence, 12, 19, 26, and she stood with both hands resting on the cart handle, thinking about Maya's dentist appointment on Thursday and whether she could cover it before the next paycheck. Then the doors opened on 34 and her hands went cold. Not a chill. Not a shiver. Something deeper, a drop in temperature that started in her palms and moved inward, like the floor had shifted beneath her feet without moving at all. She stood in the elevator doorway for 3 full seconds before stepping out. The hallway stretched ahead of her. Pale walls, dark floors, tall windows at the far end framing a sky that was still deciding between grey and gold. Celeste looked at that window and felt her chest do something she had no name for. Not pain exactly. The shape of pain. The outline of something that used to be there. She started mopping. She mopped the hallway once and felt it. She mopped it a second time, telling herself she had missed a section. She mopped it a third time and stopped pretending it was about the floors. Walking away from that window felt wrong in a way she couldn't explain to anyone, including herself. She stood in the pale morning light with her eyes closed for just a moment. First day. She turned. An older woman with a grey bun and a cart older than both of them watched her with the patient expression of someone who had seen many things and been surprised by very few. Yes, Celeste said. Keep your head down on this floor. Quiet. Without drama. The CEO lost his wife 3 years ago. He's not right since. None of them up here are. Celeste nodded. Said nothing. Finished the hallway without looking at the window again. That night she sat on the edge of Maya's bed long after the lamp went out, staring at the wall while Maya's small warm weight shifted beside her. Mama. Half dreaming, soft. What's wrong? Celeste pulled the blanket up to her daughter's chin and held it there for a moment. Nothing, baby. She paused. I just think I've been somewhere before that I can't remember. Maya was already asleep. Celeste sat in the dark, her hands folded in her lap, still faintly cold. Roman Ashford arrived at 6:47 a.m., which was 13 minutes later than usual, which meant he had slept poorly again, which meant Mrs. Holt on the security desk would quietly alert his assistant, who would quietly move his first meeting from 7 to 7:30, and nobody would say a word about any of it. This was the system they had built around him in the 3 years since the accident. A careful, wordless architecture of accommodation designed to hold a man upright who had forgotten how to do it himself. He rode the elevator to 34. He walked the hallway. He stopped. There was a cup of coffee on his desk. He stood in the doorway and looked at it the way a man looks at something that should not exist. Still, cautious, as if movement might disturb whatever explanation was about to present itself. He set his bag down slowly. He crossed to the desk. He picked up the cup and drank without thinking, the way you do when your hands know something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. It was exactly right. No sugar. Oat milk. 2 degrees below scalding, a preference so specific he had never once written it down anywhere, never dictated it to an assistant, had arrived at it gradually over years of quiet mornings until it simply became the only way coffee made sense to him. Nobody in the building knew it. He had never told anyone because it had never occurred to him that it needed to be said. It was simply the way things were. He set the cup down and called security. The footage from 5:47 a.m. showed a woman in a grey and green uniform moving through his office with the quiet efficiency of someone doing a job they had done 10,000 times. She dusted. She straightened. She did not touch his shelves or his desk. And then at the credenza beside the window she stopped and looked at the small espresso machine he kept there. the one his assistant had never once operated without being coached through it step by step, and used it without hesitation, without reading the controls. Her hands moved over the machine the way hands move over something deeply familiar, and she placed the finished cup on his desk, adjusted it a quarter inch to the left, and walked out without looking back. Roman watched the footage 4 times. On the 4th viewing he paused it on her face, profile turned slightly toward the window, morning light falling along the line of her cheek. Something passed through him that he chose not to examine, the way you decline to open a door when you are not certain you are ready for whatever is behind it. He closed the footage. He did not call HR. He did not send a note to Patrice in housekeeping. He simply sat with his exactly right coffee in the early quiet of his office and said nothing to anyone and let the thing he was not examining settle somewhere below the level of conscious thought, where it would wait with considerable patience. Diana Shin arrived at 8, as always, in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, carrying his second coffee and the day's briefing notes and the specific quality of calibrated attention she had spent 3 years perfecting. Present without being intrusive, indispensable without advertising it. She set everything down and noticed the other cup immediately. Her eyes moved to it and back to him in under a second, a movement so swift and controlled it was almost professional. "The new housekeeping staff," Roman said, before she could form the question. "I'll remind them about the desk protocol," Diana said pleasantly. "Leave it." The pause that followed was brief. Precisely brief. Diana smiled and gathered her folders and asked him 3 questions about the morning's agenda on her way to the door, laughed once at something he said, and at the threshold glanced back, not at him but at the empty cup on the credenza, before her heels carried her away down the marble corridor. In the elevator she opened the private note she had maintained for 3 years, read the last line once, and added a new one beneath it without hesitation. "The maid on 34. Find out everything." She locked the screen. The floors descended. She kept her face completely still and gave nothing away to the empty elevator, because Diana Shin had survived this long by treating every room, even empty ones, as though someone was always watching. Upstairs, Roman stood at the hallway window with his second coffee untouched on his desk and looked out at the city the way he had looked at it every morning for 3 years, like a man searching the horizon for something he could not name, and did not yet understand that what he had been waiting for had arrived at 5:47 a.m., adjusted his coffee a quarter inch to the left, and was currently working the lobby of the 22nd floor without any memory of his name. The babysitter cancelled at 6:14 a.m., which gave Celeste exactly 11 minutes to solve an unsolvable problem before her shift started. She stood in the kitchen in her uniform with her phone in one hand and Maya's lunchbox in the other and ran through every option available to her. Mrs. Okafor had a church commitment, Diane worked Saturdays, the backup sitter had stopped returning calls 2 weeks ago, and arrived at the only conclusion a woman with no remaining options ever arrives at. "Get dressed," she told Maya. "You're coming with me. You will sit where I put you, you will do your homework, and you will not move unless I say so. Do you understand me?" Maya, who was 7 and old enough to recognize an absolute, was dressed in 4 minutes. Celeste settled her in the supply room on the 19th floor with her backpack, her worksheet packet, and a look that communicated everything the words had already covered. Maya arranged her colored pencils in a careful row, opened her workbook to the correct page, and did not look up when Celeste left. She lasted 43 minutes. It wasn't defiance. Celeste would think about this later and feel certain of it. Maya had simply finished everything in the packet and gone looking for the bathroom and taken one wrong turn in a building that looked identical on every floor to a 7-year-old who had only seen the 19th, and by the time she understood she was somewhere unfamiliar she was already standing in the marble lobby of the 34th floor with her backpack straps held in both hands, looking at everything around her with the calm, unhurried curiosity that was the most purely herself thing. About her. Roman was finishing a call near the elevator bank. His back was half turned, one hand in his pocket, his voice doing the low-controlled thing it did when he was ending a conversation he had already mentally left. He said goodbye. He lowered the phone. He turned. He saw Maya. The phone left his hand without him deciding to drop it. It hit the marble with a sound that carried across the quiet lobby and he did not move to pick it up. He stood completely still and looked at the child standing 20 feet away, and something in his face changed in a way that had no professional category. Not shock exactly, not recognition exactly, but the thing that lives in the space between them where the body understands before the mind has been given permission to. Maya looked back at him with his own eyes. Not similar to his eyes. Not reminiscent of them. His, the same depth, the same dark steadiness, the same quality of attention that his mother had always called unsettling and that Roman had always understood as simply the way he looked at things that mattered. He had seen those eyes in the mirror every morning for 38 years. He had never seen them on anyone else's face. His security team moved toward her, efficient, reaching for the professional response, and then Celeste was simply there. She came through the stairwell door at the far end of the lobby and crossed the marble floor without running, which cost her something, and placed herself between Maya and the approaching security with one hand resting back on her daughter's shoulder and her body angled slightly forward in the geometry of protection. She stopped the security team with a single calm look. Then she looked at Roman. It was not an easy expression to hold, and she held it anyway. Part apology, part something that belonged to neither of them yet, part the particular steadiness of a woman who has been caught in an impossible situation and has chosen dignity as her only available response. She said quietly that she was sorry, that Maya had wondered, that it wouldn't happen again. Roman said nothing. After a long moment he bent and picked up his phone. He looked at it briefly, the way you look at an object when you need somewhere to put your eyes. Then he walked to the elevator and pressed the call button and did not look back. That evening he unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk at home, unopened for 5 months, and took out the photograph. His wife on their first anniversary, laughing at something just beyond the camera's edge, completely unaware of the light falling across her face. He sat with it in the dark for a long time, not grieving exactly, but rearranging something. Some internal furniture that had been fixed in place for 3 years and was now, quietly and without his permission, beginning to shift. The theft report was filed at 8:03 a.m. on a Tuesday, which meant Diana had prepared it over the weekend, which meant she had been planning it before the incident with Maya in the lobby, which meant, though Celeste would only understand this later, that the child's eyes had not created the problem so much as accelerated a timeline that was already in motion. The report named a pair of cufflinks from the executive changing room. Platinum, monogrammed, valued at $4,000. The witness was a junior facilities coordinator named Brett who delivered his account to HR with the practiced steadiness of someone who had rehearsed it carefully, which he had, twice, in Diana's office the previous Friday afternoon over coffee she had poured herself. Celeste was called in at 9. She sat across from 2 HR representatives and listened to the report read aloud with her hands folded in her lap and her face arranged into the expression she had developed over 3 years of being in rooms where the outcome had been decided before she arrived. She did not interrupt. She did not raise her voice. When they finished she said, clearly and without heat, that she had not taken anything, that she had never entered the executive changing room, and that she would like to see the evidence beyond the testimony of a single witness. They thanked her for her cooperation and asked her to surrender her access card. The escort arrived 2 minutes later, 2 security officers, which was one more than protocol required and therefore a choice, a small deliberate cruelty dressed in the clothing of procedure. They walked her through the main lobby at 9:17 a.m., which was peak arrival hour, which was not an accident either. Celeste reached into her uniform pocket as she walked. Her fingers found Maya's school photo, the one from October where Maya had insisted on 2 uneven puffs and was grinning with the uncomplicated confidence of a child who had not yet learned to make herself smaller. Celeste pressed it flat against her palm. She lifted her chin. She walked. She did not cry. She did not look at the floor. She did not fold herself inward against the weight of the lobby watching. She walked the full length of the marble corridor with the posture of a woman who had been humiliated before, by harder circumstances, by colder rooms, by people with far more creative cruelty than this, and had survived every single instance, and whose spine carried that knowledge in a way that no escorted removal could touch. The security officers on either side of her seemed to understand this without being able to articulate it. They did not take her arm. On the 34th floor, Roman stood at the window. He had been there for 4 minutes, which was how long it had taken his assistant to mention, with careful neutrality, that there appeared to be a situation in the lobby involving housekeeping staff. He watched Celeste move through the lobby 34 floors below. He watched her chin. He watched her hand pressed flat against something in her pocket that he was too high to identify. He watched her reach the revolving doors and push through them without a single backward glance and disappear into the grey morning outside, as though she had simply decided the building was no longer worth her attention. He stood at the window for 2 minutes after she was gone. Then he returned to his desk and called HR directly, which he had not done personally in 4 years, which caused the director to answer with the elevated formality of someone who understands that certain phone numbers mean a decision has already been made. The termination filed this morning for the housekeeping employee, Roman said. Reverse it. A careful pause. Mr. Ashford, there is a formal report on file. Reverse it. Of course. May I ask the reason? Because I said so. He ended the call. Diana appeared in his doorway at 11 with the afternoon briefing and the question delivered in the light, pleasant register she used for things that mattered most to her. He gave her a single look, not warm, not cold, simply final, and repeated the same 4 words. Diana nodded. She smiled with her mouth. She left. At her desk she opened the private note on her phone and read it from the beginning, every entry. The way you audit a plan when one of its variables has begun behaving outside projected parameters. Then she added a new line, underlined it once, and locked the screen without letting herself feel anything about it. He's already protecting her. Move faster. The conference room on 34 was the last room on Celeste's Thursday evening rotation, which meant she reached it at 8:40 p.m. when the building had thinned to security staff and the particular kind of executive who confused long hours with devotion. She preferred the building this way. After hours it had a different quality of silence, cleaner, more honest, less performed. She pushed through the conference room door with her cart and registered 2 things immediately. The overhead lights had been left on a low warm setting rather than the full fluorescence, which was unusual. And there was music. It came from the room's integrated sound system, low but clear, filling the space with the kind of unhurried intimacy that belongs to late evenings and rooms where something true has recently been said. A jazz piece, piano-led, with a trumpet that entered late and carefully, the way a person speaks when they are trying to say something honest without saying it directly. No vocals yet. Just the instruments finding each other across the quiet. Celeste left her cart by the door and began working. She moved around the long table collecting forgotten coffee cups and water glasses, straightening chairs, her hands operating on their own reliable autopilot while her mind drifted to Maya's reading assessment on Friday and whether the week's groceries would stretch to Saturday. The work was familiar enough by now to require very little of her, which was its own kind of mercy. The vocals began. She did not recognize the song. She had no memory of ever hearing it. She could not have named it, could not have said who recorded it or where or when. There was no reason on earth her body should have known it. Her lips were already moving. She understood this before she could stop it, forming syllables she had no conscious knowledge of, her mouth 3 words ahead of her comprehension, her body doing the thing it sometimes did in this building, on this floor, in the hallway with the window that made her chest ache, which was to know things her mind had not been given access to. Her hand slowed on the chair back she was straightening. The mop handle slipped. It hit the floor and the sound of it broke something loose in her chest and she sat down, not in a chair but on the floor itself, back against the long conference table, knees drawn up, both palms pressed flat against the cool wood beneath her as though she needed the anchor of something solid and real. She was shaking. Not violently, quietly, the way you shake when something passes through you that is too large for your body to process standing up. She had learned in 3 years of unexplained moments not to fight this, to let it move through her like weather, to wait on the other side of it for solid ground. The ground did not come. The song simply continued, and she stayed where she was, and the shaking eased by degrees into something stiller and more bewildering, which was the feeling of knowing every word to a song she had never heard. She did not hear the door open. She heard him stop. Roman stood in the doorway with his laptop under his arm and looked at her sitting on the floor of his conference room in the warm dim light, and whatever he had come back for at this hour, it was not this. He did not speak. He did not move toward the sound panel on the wall to his left. He stood in the doorway and the music played in the space between them and his face did what it had been doing in unguarded moments for weeks now. It went quiet. Not blank, not closed, but quiet in the particular way of someone who has just recognized something they were not prepared to find. Celeste looked up at him. She did not apologize or reach for an explanation or pull herself to her feet with professional efficiency. She was too tired for any of that, and the song was still playing, and something about the way he was standing in the doorway, still unhurried, making no move to end this moment, made the apology feel unnecessary in a way she couldn't have justified to anyone. He didn't turn the music off. She didn't get up. The song moved around them in the warm low light and they stayed exactly where they were, a man in a doorway and a woman on the floor of his conference room, held in place by something neither of them could name yet but that both of them, in some region below conscious thought, already recognized. Two people in a room at the end of a long day with a secret between them that was only a secret because the words for it hadn't arrived yet. The trumpet played its careful, honest phrase. Neither of them moved. Gloria Ashford arrived at the building the way she arrived everywhere, slightly ahead of schedule and entirely without surprise, as though the world had long ago learned to arrange itself in advance of her presence. She was 71 years old and moved like a woman 20 years younger, and the quality of attention she brought to every room she entered, taking everything in, assigning everything a value, discarding nothing until she had decided it was safe to, was the quality that had allowed her to survive 4 decades at the edge of serious power without ever formally holding it herself. She noticed Celeste before she reached the elevator bank. Not because she recognized her. Whatever recognition might have lived somewhere in Gloria's memory had been carefully managed over 3 years of deliberate self-convincing and the practiced certainty that dead things stayed where you put them. What she noticed was Roman. Walking beside her across the lobby, he had adjusted his posture by approximately 2 degrees in the direction of the cleaning staff near the far corridor. He had not looked over. He had been precise about not looking over. A man who feels nothing does not take care to avoid looking. Gloria said nothing. She filed it in the part of her mind she kept for useful things and spent 4 hours upstairs being precisely as warm and formidable as the morning required. At 2 o'clock she asked Roman's assistant to arrange a brief meeting with the housekeeping staff member currently assigned to the executive floor, under the heading of a staff welfare initiative she had raised at 2 previous board meetings and never once acted on, which meant it existed in the official minutes as a real and documented thing and could not be questioned by anyone paying less than complete attention, which in Gloria's experience was almost everyone. Celeste arrived at the small meeting room on 32 at 2:30. She had been told only that a board member wished to conduct a routine staff check-in. She sat down across from Gloria Ashford and recognized power the way people who have never held it always do, completely and without hesitation, and folded her hands on the table and waited with the patient composure she had spent 3 years building into herself one difficult room at a time. Gloria looked at her for a long moment with the assessing quality she had refined over decades, the particular look designed to make people feel measured and found slightly wanting. Then she folded her own hands and produced the smile that had closed 100 difficult conversations. "I'll be direct," Gloria said. "I believe you're a capable woman. I believe you work hard. And I believe this position represents a fraction of what you could be doing." She let the pause land precisely where she intended it to. "I'd like to offer you a relocation package. $200,000. Enough to begin somewhere new, somewhere with real possibility. All I ask is that you resign today and that you don't return." The room was very quiet. Celeste did not look at the folder Gloria had placed on the table between them, or at the figure printed on the single page inside it. She looked at Gloria, steadily, without aggression, taking her time in a way that shifted the room's balance by a degree neither of them named aloud. She let the silence remain exactly as long as she needed it to. Then she said, evenly and without any performance at all, "Why would a woman like you offer that much money to get rid of a maid?" It landed the way the right question always lands, without drama, without needing any. Gloria's expression moved once. Briefly. A single ripple crossing a very controlled surface before it sealed itself again. In that fraction of a second Celeste saw something she did not yet have the full architecture to understand. Fear that had spent so many years dressed as authority that it had almost forgotten its original shape. The mask returned. Gloria closed the folder with one hand. "Consider it carefully," she said. "I have," Celeste said. "Thank you for your time." She left the folder on the table and walked out without hurrying, without looking back, without giving Gloria the satisfaction of a closing expression to read. That evening Gloria sat in the back of her car in the building's parking structure and called Diana. The call lasted 4 minutes. She did not describe the meeting or explain her reasoning or provide any detail that could later be repeated in a room she wasn't present in. She had not survived 40 years at the edge of power by leaving the record of her intentions inside other people's memories. She said what needed saying in the tone she reserved for things she required to be understood as permanent and non-negotiable. The word she used was eliminate. She ended the call. The parking structure lights cast their pale flat light against the car window. Gloria looked at her own reflection for a moment, composed, certain, entirely unchanged, and told her driver to take her home. The call went out at 11:23 a.m. on a Thursday. Maya had made it through morning registration and 2/3 of a math lesson before her teacher noticed the flush high on her cheeks and the way she was holding herself very still in her chair in the careful manner of a child trying not to draw attention to the fact that something was wrong. By the time the nurse took her temperature, it was 103.4 and climbing, and Maya was sitting on the narrow cot in the nurse's office with her backpack in her lap and her hands folded on top of it, being extremely brave in the way that children are brave when they are frightened and have learned not to show it. The nurse pulled up the emergency contact record and dialed the primary number. Celeste's phone went to voicemail immediately. She was 3 floors underground in the Ashford Corp maintenance corridor where the signal had never once successfully carried, and the nurse moved to the secondary number without pausing, because a child with a fever of 103 did not have time for protocol hesitation. The number had no name beside it in the records. Celeste had carried it over from a battered notebook she had found in her hospital discharge bag 3 years ago, a notebook containing 6 pages of handwriting she didn't recognize as her own and a single phone number on the inside back cover that she had never called and never been able to explain and never quite brought herself to delete. She had listed it as a secondary emergency contact, the way you keep something you don't understand, carefully, without knowing why. The call connected to the executive reception desk on the 34th floor of Ashford Corp. Roman's assistant answered on the second ring with the measured professionalism of someone accustomed to fielding calls that required discretion. She heard the nurse's introduction and was already formulating the polite redirect. Wrong number, no record of a child, deeply sorry for the confusion, when Maya's voice came through the line. Small. Frightened. Trying very hard not to sound either of those things. Is my daddy there? Roman's assistant had worked for him for 6 years. She had managed collapsed deals and hostile boardrooms and the particular sustained grief of the 3 years since the accident without losing her composure in any professional sense. Her hands shook as she transferred the call. Roman picked up on the first ring. For seconds of silence passed in which neither the child nor the man on the other end of the line said anything, and in those 4 seconds something moved through Roman that had no name in any language he had been given. Then Maya said, "I'm sick. Mommy wrote your number down for emergencies." He was in his car in 3 minutes. His assistant watched him go and said nothing to anyone and sat quietly at her desk for a long moment before she trusted herself to make the next call on her list. He arrived at the school before Celeste did. He was sitting in the nurse's office on the chair pulled close to the narrow cot, and he was holding Maya's hand, not tentatively, not carefully, but with the straightforward steadiness of someone whose hands had simply decided before the rest of him caught up, and Maya was asleep against the pillow with her temperature slightly reduced and her other hand still curled around the strap of her backpack, because she was her mother's daughter and had not fully relinquished it even in sleep. Celeste came through the school's front doors at 11:51 a.m., still in her work uniform, having run 4 blocks from the nearest point where her phone signal had finally returned and she had heard the nurse's voicemail and understood. She followed the corridor to the nurse's office. She reached the open doorway. She saw him. Her hand found the doorframe. She held it and stood very still, and the memory did not come gently and it did not come in pieces. It came the way a dam fails, not gradually, not at the edges, but all at once and with the full weight of everything it had been holding back, pressing through the single point of failure until there was nothing left to hold. The wedding. His hands. The apartment with the broken radiator they had laughed about for 2 years. The morning with the test. The last phone call, drive carefully, his voice distracted and ordinary and completely unaware that ordinary was ending. The brake pedal going soft. Diana's voice through the window. The impact. And before all of it, underneath all of it, This man's face on the first morning she had ever seen it, and the specific way he had looked at her, like she was something he had been trying to find the word for his entire life. Celeste stood in the doorway of a school nurse's office and held the doorframe and breathed, and Roman looked up from his daughter's sleeping face and found her there, and neither of them spoke. There was nothing that could have been said in that moment that would not have been smaller than what the moment required. The memories did not return gently. They crashed over Tiana like a tidal wave, dragging her under with the full weight of everything that had been stolen from her. In the dim light of her tiny apartment, she sat motionless for 3 days, the world outside reduced to a distant hum. The wedding in the private garden at sunset, Marcus's hands trembling as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Their honeymoon in Santorini, where he had whispered promises against her skin under starlit skies. The morning she told him she was pregnant, the way his face had lit up with raw joy before fear crept in. Fear of his family, fear of the empire that demanded perfection. The last phone call, his voice urgent, "Amora, whatever happens, come straight home." Then the accident, the screech of tires, the sickening lurch as the brakes failed. Diana's cold voice on speakerphone moments before impact, giving instructions to someone named Gloria. Make it look natural. She knows too much. Tiana, no, Amora, did not cry. Not anymore. The tears from that office confrontation had dried, leaving behind something sharper, colder. She did not tell Roman. She did not call anyone. Instead, she opened her battered laptop and began to pull together 3 years of fragments she had unconsciously collected while scrubbing floors and emptying trash in the gleaming halls of Ashford Corporation. A police report she had never understood why she kept. A blurry photo of a car she didn't recognize, snapped outside Diana's apartment during one of her cleaning shifts. Financial records she had quietly photographed from Marcus's desk without knowing why at the time. Transfers to offshore accounts, payments labeled contingency. She built a file, each piece clicking into place like a loaded gun. On the 4th morning, she rose with deliberate calm. She dressed in the best outfit she owned, a simple black sheath dress that still carried the faint memory of better days, paired with the only heels that didn't pinch. She arranged for Maya to stay with the kind neighbor downstairs, kissing her daughter's forehead with a quiet promise in her heart. Then she walked into the Ashford Corp headquarters, head high, the weight of the USB drive burning in her purse like contraband. The boardroom on the top floor was in full session when she arrived. No one had announced her. Security had tried to stop her at the elevator, but something in her eyes, or perhaps the lingering shock from the scene days earlier, made them hesitate just long enough. She pushed open the heavy glass doors without knocking. Conversations died instantly. 24 suited executives turned, their faces a mix of irritation and recognition. Marcus sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his sharp dark suit impeccable, but his posture stiffened the moment he saw her. His eyes widened, shock flickering across the same features that had once looked at her with desperate affection. Tiana stopped at the foot of the table, her gaze sweeping the room before locking onto him. Tears no longer fell freely, but the memory of them lingered in the faint tracks on her cheeks. Her eyes, however, were sharp, defiant, and dangerously knowing. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady and clear, carrying the quiet power of someone who had just remembered she was never meant to be invisible. Or should I say, husband? Gasps rippled through the board. Diana, seated to Marcus's right, went pale. Gloria, the family's longtime attorney, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Tiana placed the USB drive on the table with a soft click that echoed like a gavel. I remembered everything. The wedding. The pregnancy. The cut brake lines. And exactly who gave the order. Marcus rose slowly, his knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the table. The air thickened with tension, the revelation hanging between them like a live wire. For the first time in years, the billionaire who controlled empires looked utterly unprepared for what stood before him. Not a maid he could fire, but the wife who had come back from the grave of his secrets. And in that moment, everything changed. Celeste placed the file on the polished mahogany table without a word. The document spoke first. Page after page slid under the cold fluorescent lights, irrefutable proof of the staged accident, Diana's crisp instructions captured in deleted emails, Gloria's wire transfers funneled through shell companies, and 3 long years of corporate fraud committed in Roman's name while he had mourned a wife who was still alive, quietly mopping his floors and raising their daughter in secret. The boardroom, once buzzing with quarterly projections, fell into a stunned silence thick enough to choke on. Diana shot to her feet first, her face drained of color. "This is preposterous." Gloria rose beside her, lips pressed into a thin line, already calculating damage control. Roman did not move. He simply stared at Celeste, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time since that shattering moment in his office. The ruthless billionaire who had buried his grief beneath layers of steel and ambition slowly lowered his head into his hands at the head of his own boardroom table. A broken sound escaped him, raw and unguarded, the kind of sound a man who had not cried in 3 years could no longer hold back. Security arrived within moments. Diana and Gloria were escorted out in silence, their protests swallowed by the heavy glass doors as lawyers waited in the corridor like wolves. The board meeting ended before it had truly begun. Celeste slipped away in the chaos, her heels clicking softly against the marble as she made her way to the underground parking garage. She leaned against her battered 10-year-old sedan, arms crossed, the evening air cool against her skin. In the backseat, Maya slept peacefully, small chest rising and falling under a blanket, oblivious to the earthquake that had just shaken their world. Footsteps echoed behind her. Roman approached alone, his sharp suit rumpled, tie loosened, the weight of everything he had lost and everything he had done carved into the lines of his face. He stopped a few feet away, not crowding her, respecting the invisible line she had drawn. He did not beg for forgiveness. Not yet. Instead, his voice came low and rough. "Did she always have my eyes?" Celeste looked at him for a long time, the parking garage lights casting long shadows between them. Tears no longer threatened to fall, her gaze remained steady, cool, and entirely her own. "She has your stubborn jaw, too," she said quietly. "I just didn't know whose it was." The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. It was not a reconciliation. Not yet. It was only a beginning, careful, earned, and entirely on Celeste's terms. She would decide the pace, the boundaries, the future. For the first time in 3 years, the hollow ache in her chest had a name. It was grief, yes, but also power. The power of memory restored. The power of a mother who had survived. Roman nodded once, swallowing hard. He glanced toward the sleeping child in the car, something fragile and hopeful flickering across his usually unreadable features. Then he turned and walked away. For the first time in 3 years, Roman Ashford drove home to a house that no longer felt like a memorial. It felt like the beginning of something new, something that would have to be rebuilt slowly, honestly, and on the terms of the woman who had once been his wife and had returned as something far stronger.